Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today, Dr. Krupinski. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Are there methods that have kind of risen to the top as ones that work the most effectively in helping assess quality and the impact on accuracy and efficiency?
Well, in terms of accuracy and efficiency, yeah, I mean, observer studies with ROC techniques and related techniques for assessing observer performance are out there. Efficiency is typically studied with time motion studies or simply looking at how long it takes someone to do something. I do a lot of eye tracking studies, which is probably unique, and I really wouldn't recommend that everybody go out and buy eye trackers. But it is one way of getting at, how is it people are getting information from a source into their brains, a visual source into their brains. That's one way. Um, and then in the field of human factors, actually, and industrial organizational psychology, there are a ton of methods that are available that are used a lot in academics, sometimes in product development. I'd like to think they're used more often in product development, but they are available and they are widely validated, but end up being used more in research, or when a big company wants to kind of overhaul their entire system, and you can hire some of these companies to come in and do such an analysis. But a lot of these tools are available, out in the public and on, you can Google them and get the publications and actually download some of the tools and make them available to your institution. I mean, one that we've used that's freely available is something called the Cornell Musculoskeletal Computer User Survey. And it was developed by the human factors team there in their division of industrial organization, industrial psychology. And it is something that you could readily use. It's a checklist. Here, have people go through and check, how do they feel? And it literally outlines every part of the body. And it, asks you questions. I mean, how often have you experienced aches, pains in the past week in all these areas? To what degree is it, slightly painful? And then has it impacted your ability to do your work? So there are a lot of these tools that are readily available in simply, a lot of times, simply survey form that allow you to go out and collect the information and find out what it is that people are experiencing. And once you know what they're experiencing, then you can start to look at ways to intervene and develop tools and different technologies perhaps that can help them.
Okay. Well, switching gears just a little bit, because I know
Mhm.
one thing that's included in your presentation is the discussion of bias that exists. So what are the biases that exist that can impact the assessment and the use of these AI tools?
Uh, well, in terms of the assessment, a lot of it is, the standard biases in terms of setting expectations. So any investigator approaching any study has biases. I mean, they want it to turn out a certain way. So there's expectation bias. But I was really talking about the biases more not in assessing the tools, but in the actual use of the tools. And particularly, I was talking about AI tools and how some of these implicit biases that we have can really influence the decisions that people are made. So, one good example that uh, I sort of have been thinking about is, so for example, in mammography, right now, you expect, say, one cancer out of 1,000 cases. So a mammographer comes into the situation thinking, okay, one case out of 1,000. The majority of what I'm going to see is normal. So I'm looking for that relatively rare abnormality. And this is just in screening. Well, now AI comes along and triages out, say, even 50% of the cases as the computer is, 99.99% certain this is normal. Well, now all of a sudden, the mammographer is faced with a very different situation in terms of expectations, sort of an anchoring bias, where now it's 1 out of 500 because half the cases are gone. Right? So now you really changed how they have to approach the situation. And their existing biases, if you want to call that, or cognitive framework for what they're doing is dramatically changed. So if now you're expecting something 1 out of 500 instead of 1 out of 1,000, or, as the algorithm gets better and better, now you're expecting more and more cancers in fewer cases. So you've really changed the nature of the task, and they've got to then change their decision criterion, because now they're being faced with far more cases that the probability is that they're abnormal. Now, does that change the overall decision-making process? Does it change their use of BI-RADS? All these things we don't really know. But this is some of the types of biases, or bias in terms of, like I said, expectations, or just grounding. What would you expect? Do you have complete confidence in the AI system, and therefore completely biased? Anytime the computer says this is it, you just go with it?
Right.
Could potentially impact residents and fellows more than it would an experienced faculty member. But getting back to the question that about being in assessment, the big one there is the Hawthorne effect, which is when people are being studied and they know they're being studied, they do better. They're either more productive because somebody's watching over me, and so I'm going to really get at this task. But they're also more careful,
Right.
because they don't want to look bad. And so, their performance is actually better perhaps than it would be in real life.
Gotcha. So then are there ways, I guess, to not necessarily counteract, but take into account these biases or work around them in a way that might be, to the betterment of the use of these tools?
Mhm. Yeah, I think in a lot of the stuff that I've been talking about, which is the realm of human factors and really trying to look at people in their natural environment doing real life tasks, it can actually be a little easier than in the lab. In the lab, you've got somebody there for an hour, maybe 2 hours. It's just a whole study environment. People know they're being studied. It's an artificial set of cases and so on. But when you're looking at people in real life, and you want to observe. So maybe for the first half hour, the Hawthorne effect might be there, because they know they're being observed. Then after a while, it's like, God, I got to really do my job. And they just kind of forget about you in the background, and they don't realize, they forget about the fact that maybe they're being timed, they're being watched, they're being monitored and so on. And so you kind of ignore the first half hour or so of your data and then go with it after that. And you're less likely to have the confounds or biases, simply because people just got to get on with their days.
Absolutely. Well, then stepping back to, I guess, a 50,000 level perspective,
Mm-hmm.
for individuals and providers who were not able to participate in your session or watch virtually, what are some of the main takeaway points that you would want people to remember?
Yeah, I think, probably two. One is that, we really do have to consider uh, the radiology environment as a system that includes not only the technology, but the user. And I don't think you could separate the two of them. The technology is no good if you can't use a technology in a vacuum. You've got to have the user there, at least for now. And if you don't consider this system, this synergistic system, you're missing out. You cannot have a technology without the user. And to be perfectly honest, our users are useless without the various technologies. So you must look at it that way. And I think the second key takeaway point is we have to be actively engaged in this process. You can't expect someone else will take care of it and I'll benefit from it. Because I think every individual is so different perceptually, cognitively, how we react to different things in our environments, the displays, just everything. That if you want your environment, your interface to be optimized, you have to actively go in and figure out what's working for you, what's not working for you, and then figure out how to adjust it and optimize it for you. Rather than saying, this is, I'll let somebody else figure out, or, we'll just do what the department says. I think we really have to bring it back to the individual, and they have to be an active participant in creating the environment that's best for them.
All right. Well, Dr. Krupinski, I appreciate you taking the time this afternoon. Thank you so much.
No, thank you for the opportunity.
It's my pleasure.